for those of you who are scientists already, you'll know that it's actually not that easy being a scientist. It's difficult to make experiments work. There's lots of reasons why they fail. Even when they do work, you still have to publish what you've done, and then so you spend a lot of time trying to write your papers, and then the referees don't like them, and the more unanticipated your results are, the less the referees will like them. So you think you're advancing knowledge, and they don't believe you, and it's not easy, and so on. But most of us are we plug away and trying to do it, and as you've seen, it can be fun. You've seen tonight as well. So if you have the right personality, science can be great. But there are some who, for various reasons, don't seem to quite go along with the way it should be done. They presumably went in with the best of motives, but maybe at the end it doesn't work out. So let's start with it. I'm English, so let's start with a London fraudster. This chap called Edward Ehring. If you look carefully, you'll see that these papers are retracted. I've forgotten to get my red, which I can't reach anyway, but there was I will need this for some of the things, so let's practice. Retraction, you see? So he answered retraction because he made up data. But he didn't just stop there. He actually tried to poison his secretary because she was pregnant. And he thought that was a bad thing. And he went to jail for that. So, he's not really the right kind of person even to be a doctor, let alone a scientist. Or perhaps that's not really fair to doctors, but he should have taken the Hippocratic Oath, and he shouldn't be poisoning people. He's English. Let's get closer to home. We have Ludwigshafen, Joachim Bolt, retracted 90 papers once they noticed that some of the people that were in the groups that he was testing didn't actually exist. He didn't get ethical permission for what he was doing because obviously if you don't have patients, it's difficult to get ethical permission as well. And he was promoting something called hydroxyethyl starch in fluids for people who were being operated on, were very ill, and everybody else thought that these were causing kidney damage. But he had so many papers that said the opposite. It was balancing out the rest of the literature. He was suspended in 2010. The EU and the US banned this HES product. You can't sell it in those countries anymore, in the whole of Europe. So there we go. But most of the people I'm going to talk about aren't English or German, but I wanted to point out that really this is everywhere. So that's me getting confused in this picture of, because I was reading an article that I couldn't really understand at some point. And eventually I noticed that maybe there was problems with this paper, and we can, as scientists now, find a place on the internet where we can comment on other papers. And so, for the non-scientists among you, PubMed is the place where we go and search for papers, and then we get links from there to go and download them. But nowadays you can comment there, and so I thought what I would do is leave a comment there. And so the comment's much longer than I've got on the screen, but anyway, at the end of what it says here, it says, based on close examination of figures in the paper, we have now decided to exclude this paper from further consideration. And I'm going to show you now. I'm going to nip out of the talk, and I'm hoping that I can display the PDF, but I'm not really sure about that because I have a different shape to you lot. Let's see what we can see. Yeah, it's mostly up there. And it's rather a small screen there, but I'm going to go down and try and make one of these figures a bit bigger that I've commented on. And maybe you can start to see the problems, or maybe you can, or maybe you can't. So I'll come around and see whether you can see any of these problems. You might. It's a bit small, but there's what's supposed to be a jet electrophoresis experiment. So all of these bands were moved through a medium. But actually, they haven't. They've cut and pasted them, and they've gone over the edge of this square here. You might just see that it's gone away. And that's the same from here as well. It's lighter grey than the other one. Here are two that are the same. You can tell that because of these little dots next to them. So they've cut and pasted in these as well. And here are two pairs. This one's a bit more stretched than that. But so it's really quite busy, that one. But there's plenty more in the paper, but I'll just maybe show one more. You see, I'm on, these are quite fun. Maybe I'll make it a bit bigger. And then I can press my buttons. Right, so see that little dot there, the same as that little dot there, and that little dot there, the same as that little dot there. So just use the same set of material in two different cases, but the writing up here isn't the same. So these are supposed to be the control experiments for the rest of these experiments. And without even understanding what these experiments are, you just have to know that you're not allowed to do this. So what I've done is just left a report about this paper in the place where anybody who's interested in this paper, it's from 2003, 12 years old, but if they go there, they can read about this, and then you haven't got to read the paper anymore. Which is, you know, we're busy. That's good. And save time. So, let's get going again. Here we are. Let's move on now to another one, and we'll get to the YouTube exposure in a minute. But here's a retracted paper from a Japanese group, published in 2003. It's got a nice big retracted on it, all very good. And if you look at that figure D here, I'll just make it bigger, and I'll mark out some features. So this is supposed to be one of these gel electrophoresis experiments where your proteins of interest migrating in this direction, but the problem is actually all of these are not different, they're all the same, and there's these little spots here which give it away rather, and some other spots. You won't be able to necessarily see all of that. So all of these are the same, and then they've added some more stuff down here to make it look more interesting and pretend that they found things with different experiments, but actually it's the same thing repeated 6 times in a row. This one's slightly bent, just to fool you, but it's the same one. And then there are little patches here where there's nothing in, they're just grey boxes. So that's why that paper's been retracted mainly. There's a few other interesting details as well. But that's a 2003 paper, but oh yeah, I mean, it's really not worth the paper that it's written on. It's rather valueless. So this came from the lab of Shigeaki Kato. And the story actually doesn't start in 2003, it starts in 2009 because they published a paper in Nature, the most famous scientific journal. Now, I happen to know that the week it got published, Nature were informed of a very large amount of those kind of images. That's because I told them. And I did, of course, go and tell a few of my colleagues and people. I'm not really in the field that it's published in. I read those papers. It's a chromatin. For those who know what chromatin is, chromatin modification paper. But it was, I could just see it on the printed page that there were problems, and I looked at the figures. And I talked to a few people and told people in the field and so on. So you can see from this that in October 2009, Nature knew about this. I phoned the editor who handled the paper and so on. Not much happened for 2 years. But 2 years later, after which there were 100 citations of that paper, it was doing very well. They corrected it, and instead of retracting it, like that last paper was eventually retracted, instead of retracting it, they just replaced all of the fabrications. And then they said, our results and conclusions are not affected by these errors. Well, so I wasn't very happy about this, but it turned out that somebody in Japan was equally as unhappy as I was, but hadn't previously known about the problems. And he's an anonymous fraud blogger called Juichi Jigen. And so he went very rapidly through 10 years worth of bad publications, and that Cell paper that I just showed you, the previous paper, I'd reported to that journal, but I was as a hobby going back through his papers, and it took me 18 months to find that. This guy went through the whole lot of his stuff, and he put them on YouTube. And within 3 months, he had resigned from Tokyo University, because you can imagine that in Japan, where the honour is very important, the sheer dishonour that was heaped by having 64 panels of figure fabrications put on YouTube, set to music, but I haven't unfortunately plugged in the music here. And then the Cell paper got retracted, which was already under investigation, and then Nature got around, in 3 months after that, to retracting that paper, which they hadn't retracted in the first place. By then it had 142 citations. So I think about 30 papers from his lab have been retracted, and it's quite remarkable that there are unfortunately situations where the head of a laboratory can actually create an endemic culture of fraud within his own laboratory and get everybody in the lab obediently doing this stuff, not just in Japan. Now the conclusion, of course, is that posting to YouTube is much better than reporting to the journal. And let's see if I can just show you. No, I have to get rid of the hub. Don't forget the hub though, next week. Let's see if we can. The internet's not great here, but there we go. Some rotated fields of cells in a couple of different papers. So this is set very nicely to music. It's not moving very fast, is it? And that's because it's trying to load. I'm not going to show you all 64, but I would like to at least show a couple more. Let's see. Maybe I can just move along. Oh, here we go. You know, so some of the things are upside down, reused across papers. It just goes on and on and on. It is reloading now. Yeah. So you get the idea. So YouTube, very effective. And at the time, the views in Japan were much higher than anywhere else. So this was really took off in Japan. So something that's been happening is that scientists have gradually worked out that they don't have to go through the published papers in order to hold discussions about science. This is something that for decades we've had to, if you even just want to make an opinion piece, it goes into a journal, it's refereed, the referee won't let you make outrageous comments, and neither will the editors and so on. So you end up that everything is sanitized and beautiful. But what's happening now, and science has been maybe a little bit slow to take full advantage of the web, but now they are. There are scientists who blog very vigorously. I showed you PubMed comments where I could comment on a paper and I can just point out that these figure fabrications, I don't have to go on about, oh, they're awful, they should all be fired, or something, but I can just point out the facts. And then there's this relatively new website called PubPeer, where it describes itself as the online journal club, but at the moment it has a lot more fraud than other kinds of discussions. We'd like it to have more discussions, obviously, to be much more generic about science, but we're going through an immature phase of pointing out fraud. Everybody, I think, in the room practically will have heard of Obokata, who last year did this terrible stem cell fraud in Japan, and her boss committed suicide under stress of it all. This is an example of the discussion. So 126 comments on that site, lots of images being analysed. The same Juichi Jigen that was investigating Kato was very active here, and what I'm showing are what are purported to be 2 mouse embryos, which it was pointing out the same mouse embryos photographed under 2 different lighting conditions. So there's an embryo, there's an embryo. You have to rotate that one a little bit, but the blood vessels are the same on its head, and this is a set of increasing transparency of that embryo being superimposed on this embryo, and really it just fits perfectly. So that was one of the frauds that got uncovered by people staring quite hard. That wasn't one of the first things that was noticed. And then there's a reused placenta across a couple of different figures. The placenta, it's a bit hard to see, but the shape of the placenta is actually generally different, except for this round bit here, which is the same, and so by rotating it you can then superimpose it. It's a little bit dark maybe for you to see, but this is another of the rather economical use of materials which went on in that paper. And there was a double pair of Nature papers published in January, we got retracted in June. And Nature, the same Nature who had the Shigeaki Kato papers and didn't want to retract them, were just following what was going on the internet, and they had to have in their comment sections, they had to have discussions about their own papers and how terrible they were and how everybody was reporting this. So because they have a news section as well as a scientific section, I think they had a very, very unpleasant time, shall we say. And they have actually retracted quite a lot of papers last year by their standards, all because of reporting on the internet. That's not really worth a paper it was written on, is it? Burn it. So, some scientists, when they start to get into trouble because people have spotted that they have got these sorts of... And it's very strange that they make these image frauds, and why do they make these figures that are so obviously fabricated? I don't have time to go into all that detail. Of course, we can discuss it later. Gizem Domez, Turkish girl who ended up in MIT, in a very big American place, had a whole slew of bad papers, and when she got into trouble, she hired a reputation enhancement company and put this online website all about herself and tells you things like, I like to work in 2-hour blocks. At the end of 2 hours, I'll take a 5-10 minute break, and actually, where they focus on something they enjoy, so people like her. So, as far as I can see, she spent 2 hours fabricating figures and then did something that she enjoyed for 5 or 10 minutes. And she's been fired from her current position, let go, because of this trail of mayhem that she left and lots of retracted papers. But the thing is that these by the time you have to do a reputation enhancement, it's too late. Perhaps I'll just try and go through for people who can see this figure as well. So it looks like that, but when you look closer, you see lines connecting the different pieces. So they've cut lots of pieces together. Someone went and used a false color system here to exaggerate things. The most obvious thing is that this little detail here, the same scratch is present twice, and these little patches. And up here, it's also very obvious that you've got the same material. So it's all just cut together the same stuff. And yeah, and really, reputation management isn't going to defeat that. So I think we have to get rid of this one as well. So, almost anybody now might find themselves in a position where they, for either internally or by reading papers, they come across evidence of fraud. So, some advice: I wouldn't necessarily recommend contacting the head of the lab that's got this problem, unless you're fairly sure they are innocent. If you know people well enough, you might know that would be the case. If you don't, then the best thing is to try to email, if there's a national office for research and integrity, as in the States, email them, simultaneously with the journal editor, and if there's a research integrity officer in the affected institution, but even when they have them, they usually try to hide the email address and make it very hard for you to find them externally. But if it is, email them all at once, show the problems, and then you've kind of done your job. Now, if you're quite junior, you may be worried about, that you'll be stomped on. So then be anonymous and don't send that information from your work computer or your home computer. Go and to a cafe or something. It does happen that people get into trouble for whistleblowing. But you might sort of get so excited that with this new power that we have of commenting on the internet. So if you want to do this, I really suggest that you write your things quite carefully and pose questions carefully. Avoid insulting people with ad hominems and so on. And really think about what is reasonable about what you're writing, because it can backlash on you. And since we're in Germany, if the Stasi would approve, then don't do it. Stop and think really about what you would do. Of course, it might happen that you get on the receiving end of some pretty, people start ripping your papers out. Not for fraud, of course, because nobody in here is a fraudster. We know that. Well, we don't, actually. But we'll hope they aren't. And, so if it happens, then you could be fairly shocked, but stay calm, stay civil, and take your time. You haven't got to just immediately reply because somebody on the internet has complained about your paper. You can take days or weeks to think about it. You haven't got to do it straight away, so think before answering. This is my final slide. When your name goes on a scientific paper, RTFP, and that stands for Read the Fucking Paper. Thanks very much.
Toby. Thank you very much for this very interesting and enlightening talk. Do we have any questions for Toby? Do we have a fraud?
See hand waving over there.
How can so much fraud happen if it's not peer-reviewed paper, you know? And peer-reviewing process is then a failure.
Yeah, so I know from my own experience really that, what a reviewer, a good reviewer, actually often won't pick up fraud because they're trying to understand the science that's in there. Now, I know, one reason that I go through a lot of papers is that we put data into a database. So we're skimming papers in a way. And if we can see figure fabrications, then that's it. It doesn't go in our database, so that's nice and easy. So your eyes start to get trained and you start picking this stuff up. But, you know, I've never actually, as a referee, spotted any, I mean, I'm a computational biologist, so I'm often not reviewing primary data anyway, but I've never actually spotted something and had to send it back to the editors. So you can't be too unfair on the peer reviewers because they're trying to study the science, and there's nothing to stop journals from putting automatic systems in place. I mean, it would cost them some money to have, but I'm sure there's a business opportunity to develop software to sell to the publishers, which will just sort of look for certain classes of things that happen a lot when people are making up fabricated images. There's another thing, which is that different areas of science are differently prone to this. So biology is an information science. So in physics, for example, although there have been some spectacular physics scores such as Hendrik shown, in general, they can't do figure fabrications, and biologists end up doing that a lot, apparently. But I wouldn't blame them too much. In the Obercarter case, the earlier reviewers, when the paper was submitted to Science, saw some figure fraud. That was reported all the way back into Japan, and nobody took any notice. They resubmitted it to Nature without anything being done. So that, you know, we have an example where they did do something. Good point, but they mainly are not looking at figures count enough because they're not expecting that to be the problem.
Right, more questions?
Yeah, so you said, in your examples you showed all this really amateur fabrication, and you really copied and pasted and you take care of the dots and everything. How much do you think is actually professional for this reason?
So all they have to do is dope the experiment. So they, you know, because you've got different strengths of these blobs. So by diluting out the components, you can get what you want. I have no idea how much of that goes on, and obviously some of it does. I think the reason that they end up with these rather amateur fabrications is that they have a group meeting coming up, and they don't have any results, and they fabricate them to make quick and dirty figures to present on the screen, and actually it's much harder to see the problems there. I don't know how many of you could even see what I was trying to show, but once you get on the screen, and there's also been a change from paper and cathode ray tubes to the high resolution screens that we have now. So the journals that are providing high resolution image data are really helping that process. Nature, of course, doesn't do that. They provide very poor quality, low resolution figures. They don't really find problems with their papers. Everything has to be Happy Valley for them. But I think it's a funny process. They first make a quick and dirty figure, then goes in a paper. And they even may forget that they did it. Fine. Maybe 2 years later, it gets published.
That's quite recurrent.
I mean, you see this all the time in these very amateurish. I mean, there are clearly thousands and thousands of such papers. I don't know how many have appeared already in the last 2 years or so. Probably 1,000 or 2,000. So there'll be plenty more to be discovered.
Good business. Any more questions? Yeah, we've got one in the back.
Okay, that's if I got there. I don't really want people to put people off being in science, by the way, because whatever you do, you have fraudsters and so on. But just be aware of it. Anyway, there's a question.
So, how much do you think the impact culture is to blame for this? Because I think in some sense that you could say that there's huge pressure.
Say again, what exactly kind of culture?
How much do you think this sort of impact active culture is to blame for this?
It's partly to blame. Okay, so I get reviewed every 4 years on the site. If I write a grant, that's going to be reviewed. If I write a paper, it's going to be reviewed, and so on. So we are increasingly under pressure. So I think that there's probably a lot of, if you like, scientists who are driven to despair and start committing fraud. Some of the examples that I've quoted are quite clearly sociopaths, like the first English guy who also poisoned his secretary because she was pregnant. And you know, there are some fairly extreme characters who it's almost impossible to stop committing fraud, but probably there's a lot of people who are just under hideous pressure. So I think it would be good if we could really lower the levels of pressure on people. But I don't know how you can stop that, because of that's pushed on from above. And there's also a little bit of the journals, the hand factor journals like to keep the pressure up, although they claim they don't, but they're lying. Yeah. But pressure is a big factor.
So to expand it, so what's the way forward?
Yes. At least for these visible ones, so Cell, who had that 2003 paper I showed, and they're hit quite badly, but don't behave as badly as Nature do. But still, they had trouble retracting a particular paper from Gibson that I showed because it was from MIT, and their offices are owned by MIT, and they couldn't do it, But they are now checking images, but I think manually, visually. But they've announced you can go and read a piece from them. Because it's much cheaper for them to stop publishing a paper than to have to go through. The amount of time it's costing editors is enormous for some of these people, going backwards and forwards, arguing about things, even if it's not a retraction but replacing a figure because only a partial probably in a paper. It's extremely costly for their time, so it's efficient for them to try to prevent it in advance. So at least for the obvious figure fraud, I think this sort of cycle of internet and journal pressure is doing something. For the more hidden frauds, that's going to be a problem. Yeah. We do it through granting agencies.
Right. Unfortunately, we gotta end it now.
Well, we can also beer.
But you can have another beer and another discussion with Toby. Let's thank Toby again.